So what is an exception? An exception is in fact an object, and it is created to signal the occurrence of unusual event during program execution. And as you have seen, that when the user entered double instead of integer, then the exception occurred as an indication that there is something major that happens and the program crashed and could not continue. Since an exception is an object, then it must be created from a class. The mechanism of creating an exception object is called throwing an exception. So what is throwing an exception? Basically, it is creating the exception object. After the exception is thrown and its object is created, then it must be handled rather than letting the program crash. The method of catching the exception is called handling the exception. So what is handling the exception? It is the code that detects and deals with the exception. So this is a summary of exceptions in Java. That exception is an object. To create it, we throw an exception. And to handle the exception, we write the code to deal with the exception. Actually, exceptions are thrown from a method so that the caller of the method can catch and handle the exception easily. When you throw an exception, for example, in your main program, in fact, you are raising the exception from a method. Why? Because your program is in fact a method. Also, every Java program basically consists of calling methods of objects created from classes. So therefore, whenever we want to throw an exception, we are going to throw it from a method. To demonstrate exception handling, including how an exception object is created and thrown, let's begin with an example that reads in two integers and displays their quotient. First, we read the two integers number 1 and number 2. Then we divide number 1 over number 2 as their quotient, and we display it on the screen. Now consider the following sample input-output. If the user enters 3 for the first integer and 0 for the second integer, you know that in Java you cannot divide an integer by 0. Therefore, the program will generate a runtime error as an exception and will show a divide by 0 runtime error message and stops the program from running. The exception has occurred because we are dividing an integer by 0. However, if we are dividing a floating point number by 0, the program does not raise an exception. It will only display the word infinity in place of the result. So this exception only occurs if we divide an integer by 0. So how to fix this error? A simple way to fix this error is to add an if statement to test for the second number as shown in this listing. After reading the two numbers, number 1 and number 2, we have an if statement that will test for number 2. If it is not equal to 0, then the program simply going to divide number 1 over number 2 and will display the quotient. However, if number 2 is not equal to 0, then simply a message will be displayed on the screen saying divisor cannot be 0, and in this case, instead of letting the program to crash, we display a simple message that we cannot divide by 0. Here is a sample input-output. Notice that if the user enters 3 for the first integer and 0 for the second integer, only a message is displayed on the screen, divisor cannot be 0, which is different than the previous version that an exception has occurred and stopped the program. Although using an if statement will fix the error, however, the code is not clean. Because if this error occurred in a method, then how to notify the caller of this method about this error? A cleaner solution is to throw an exception and make the caller of this method to catch this exception. Therefore, before introducing exception handling, let us rewrite this program to compute the quotient using a method. Here is our code rewritten so that the computation of quotient is made as a method, and the method name is called quotient. So quotient simply returns number 1 divided by number 2. So we have two methods. One is main method and the other one is the quotient method. Inside main method, after reading the two numbers, main method will call quotient method after supplying number 1 and number 2 as parameters. And quotient method will return the result and will be saved into result variable and will be printed on a screen. So the quotient method returns the quotient of two integers. If number 2 is 0, it cannot return a value. So the program is displaying a message, divisor cannot be 0, and terminated by exit 1. So this is clearly a problem. You should not let the method terminate the program. The caller should decide what to terminate the program. The caller here is main. So when we jump from main and go inside quotient, our program terminated. So the main method, which is the caller, has not been notified. So how can the quotient method notifies its caller, which is the main method, that an exception has occurred? Also, how to make the quotient method returns back to main method, which is the caller, and make the main method handles the exception instead of terminating the program. This can be done by making the quotient method throws the exception and make the caller, which is the main method, handles this exception. Here is a sample of input-output screen. If the user enters 0 for the second number, the program displays a message, divisor cannot be 0, and the program terminates. Although the output looks similar to the previous version when we added an if statement, however, the difference is that after the program displays the message divisor cannot be 0, it is stopped in the middle of the method quotient. So this looks like similar to the first version. The difference is that the first version, the system displays a message and stopped the program. However, in here, we displayed the message and we stopped the program. So let us change the program and make the method quotient throw the exception, and then make the main method handles this exception. To make our program handles the exception, we do that in 2 steps. In the first step, we have to create the exception and throw it inside the quotient method. In the second step, we have to handle this exception by using try and catch in the main method. The syntax for throwing an exception is that you write the keyword throw followed by the name of the object of the exception. And you already know how to create an object from a class. You write the word new followed by the constructor of the class, and you supply input parameter to the constructor. In our example, the name of the exception was arithmetic exception. So we have to create an object from this type of exceptions. So how to create an object of this type of exception? You write a new followed by the constructor of the class of this exception, and you provide a message that you will use inside the catch block. After creating the arithmetic exception object and thrown from the quotient method, we have to catch this exception inside the main method using the catch statement. In the catch statement, we have to define the object using the same class that was used for creating the object. Since we created the object for the exception from arithmetic exception class, then we have to receive the object in the catch statement using the same class. So therefore, we define the object that is received in the catch statement as arithmetic exception and has the name EX. So when the quotient method throws the exception object, the catch method will receive it by the name EX. In simple words, when the quotient method creates the exception object, and when this exception occurs, then the catch method will receive this object by the name EX, so that the catch method can handle this object. So let us see how our program works. We use a try and catch block inside main method, and we call the method inside the try statement. After reading the 2 numbers, number 1 and number 2, we call the method quotient, supplying number 1 and number 2 as input parameters. Then we will jump to the quotient method. Inside the quotient method, if number 2 is equal to 0, then the method will throw an exception. And if number 2 is not equal to 0, then it will skip throwing the exception and will return the result of number 1 divided by number 2, and when we return to try, it will print a message. However, if the quotient method throws an exception, then control will jump directly to the catch statement. And inside catch statement, it will receive the object for the exception created in the quotient method as input parameter by the name EX. But inside the catch, we are not using the object that was created in the quotient method. We are just simply printing a message saying that exception has occurred, that an integer cannot be divided by 0. So here is a sample input output. After asking the user to enter 2 integers, if the user entered 5 for the first integer and 0 for the second integer, then the method quotient will raise an exception, and we will jump into catch statement, and the catch statement will print exception, and integer cannot be divided by 0. So this is how we write exceptions in our programs. First, you have to raise an exception inside a method. Second, you use a try and catch block inside the caller of the method to handle the exception. To practically show you how it works, let us write and run the program in JGrasp. We are in JGrasp. This is the quotient method that computes the quotient between number 1 and number 2 as input parameters, and also if number 2 is equal to 0, it throws an arithmetic exception. And here is the main program that calls the quotient method, and it uses a try and catch to handle the exception that is raised by the quotient method. Let us run the program using the Canvas viewer. We will minimize the window, the Canvas window, make it smaller. And now we are in line 14. Let us step in, printing a message, and now we are reading the two numbers. So we will put 5 for the first number, and we will put 0 for the second number. After the program reads the two numbers, it is going to call the quotient method inside a try statement. So let us go inside the method by clicking this icon. And now we are inside the method. Number 1 is equal to 5, and number 0 as input parameters is equal to 0. Since number 2 is equal to 0, then the method will create an arithmetic exception object and will throw it. So let us step in. And now after this object is created and thrown, then control will immediately go to catch a statement, because we call this method inside a try. So this is how Java works. Whenever an exception happens from a method that is inside a try, then if this exception occurred, then immediately it will go to the catch statement. Here we have created an object of type arithmetic exception, so we have to receive it in the catch statement using the same type. So let us see now when we step in, and see now we are in catch statement. Since the object is of arithmetic exception class, then the catch will receive it as arithmetic exception by the name EX. So the object created in the quotient method does not have a name because we throw it or create it inline. But when it is received, it will be received by the name EX. Once it is received, then the catch statement will handle the exception by simply printing a message on the output screen saying that exception has happened, an integer cannot be divided by 0. Now when we go to the quotient method, in fact in the throw statement, we are doing two things. First, we are creating the object, and then we are throwing the object. So let me show you how we can do it in two steps. So we will put open brackets, open and close brackets, because we will have two statements. So first we need to create an object from arithmetic exception. We will remove it from here. And since this is the constructor name, so the class name will be the same. And here we're going to call it EX1 as an exception equal to. So this is how we create an object. In fact, we start by the class type, followed by the reference, which is a variable, equal, followed by the keyword new, and followed by the constructor. After creating the object, which is called EX1, we will throw it by using the throw statement. So here we have two steps, in fact. The first step is creating the object. The second step is throwing the object. To show you that this object, when it is thrown by quotient, it is received by the catch statement under EX, let us run the Canvas viewer. So now we are running the Canvas viewer, and we are now reading the two numbers. We will put 5 for the first number and 0 for the second number. Let us go inside the method. So now we are inside the method. So first we are creating the exception object, which is called EX1. And now notice its number here on the left hand side. Its number is 444 when it is created in the system. Now when the exception occurs, control will go immediately to the catch statement. So let us step in. So we are now in here in the catch statement. And in the catch statement, the name of the object received by the catch statement is called EX. So let us see its value. And notice that EX now is an object that has the number 444, which is the same object that was created in the quotient method. So the quotient method throws the exception object, and the catch statement in the main method catches this object. So this is a brief idea on how predefined exceptions are thrown using the throw statement and how they are handled by try and catch statements.